Thank you for tuning in to Keanoreads Goosebumps. Today I'd like to show you some of the books in my collection, namely the Monster Blood series, and in the second half of this video I'll be reading the first chapter of each of the books featured, so that you have the opportunity to judge for yourselves which is the most engaging from the beginning. And lastly, just an honourable mention to Lujeto for suggesting the content of this video, and I hope it lives up to expectation. I'm sorry it's taken me so long to make. I hope you enjoy. And so first up is Monster Blood, the first in the series. I absolutely love this one. I've read this and read this and read this God knows how many times. I remember taking it to primary school in my book bag, admiring the cover art, pretty much any opportunity during the day. Love it. And next we have my rather battered copy of Monster Blood 2, as you can see by the pen marks over there. Someone has obviously been quite bored during lessons. I bought this one second hand, and I think I've read it less than the others, but it's still an enjoyable book. And now we're on to Monster Blood 3. I absolutely love the artwork on this. It's glorious. I remember in primary school I had a good friend that used to read Goosebump books with me, and we used to try and make Monster Blood and kind of weird concoctions. Unfortunately, or fortunately if you feel that way, we never succeeded, but fond memories nonetheless. Now Monster Blood 4 has my least favourite cover art, but my favourite story. The ending is absolutely wonderful, it's really good. There'll be no spoilers in this video, by the way. I won't lie to you, I haven't actually read this one yet. Recently I brought a whole load of the Horrorland Goosebump books, and I just haven't got round to reading them. That's something I've got to look forward to though, I suppose, which is rather nice. And now, moving on to part 2 of the video, which of the opening chapters do you think is the most engaging? I don't want to stay here. Please don't leave me here. Evan Ross tugged his mother's hand, trying to pull her away from the front step of the small, pebble-dashed house. Mrs. Ross turned to him, an impatient frown on her face. Evan, you're 12 years old. Don't act like a baby, she said, freeing her hand from his grasp. I hate it when you say that, Evan exclaimed angrily, crossing his arms in front of his chest. Softening her expression, she reached out and ran her hand tenderly through Evan's curly, carrot-coloured hair. And I hate it when you do that, he cried, backing away from her, nearly stumbling over a broken pavement stone in the path. Don't touch my hair, I hate it. Okay, so you hate me, his mother said with a shrug. She climbed up the 2 steps and knocked on the front door. You've still got to stay here till I get back. Why can't I come with you? Evan demanded, keeping his arms crossed. Just give me one good reason. Your trainer lace is untied, his mother replied. So? Evan replied unhappily. I like 'em untied. You'll trip, she warned. Mum, Evan said, rolling his eyes in exasperation, have you ever seen anyone trip over their trainers because their laces were untied? Well, no, his mother admitted, a smile slowly forming on her pretty face. You just want to change the subject, Evan said, not smiling back. You're going to leave me here for weeks with a horrible old woman, and... Evan, that's enough, Mrs. Ross snapped, tossing back her straight blonde hair. Catherine is not a horrible old woman. She's your father's aunt, your great-aunt, and she's a total stranger, Evan cried. He knew he was losing control, but he didn't care. How could his mother do this to him? How could she leave him with some old lady he hadn't seen since he was 2? What was he supposed to do here, all by himself, until his mother got back? Evan, we've discussed this 1,000 times, his mother said impatiently, pounding on his aunt's front door again. This is a family emergency. I really expect you to cooperate a bit more. Her exact words were drowned out by Trigger, Evan's cocker spaniel, who stuck his head out of the back window of the rented car and began barking and howling. Now he's giving me a hard time too, Mrs. Ross exclaimed. Can I let him out? Evan asked eagerly. I think you'd better, his mother replied. Trigger's so old, we don't want him to have a heart attack in there. I just hope he doesn't terrify Catherine. I'm coming, Trigger, Evan called. He jogged to the gravel drive and pulled open the car door. With an excited yip, Trigger leapt out and began running in wide circles around Catherine's small rectangular front garden. "He doesn't look like he's 12, Evan said, watching the dog run and smiling for the first time that day. "See, you'll have Trigger for company," Mrs. Ross said, turning back to the front door. "I'll be back from Atlanta in no time, a couple of weeks at the most. I'm sure your dad and I can find a house in that time, and then we'll be back before you know it." "Yeah, sure," Evan said sarcastically. The sun dipped behind a large cloud. A shadow fell over the small front garden. Trigger wore himself out quickly and came panting up the walk, his tongue hanging out nearly to the ground. Evan bent down and patted the dog's back. He looked up at the grey house as his mother knocked on the front door again. It looked dark and uninviting. There were curtains drawn over the upstairs windows. One of the shutters had come loose and was resting at an odd angle. "Mum, why are you knocking?" he asked, shoving his hands into his jeans pockets. "You'd said Aunt Catherine was totally deaf." "Oh." His mother's face reddened. "You got me so upset, Evan. With all of your complaining, I completely forgot. Of course she can't hear us." "How am I going to spend 2 weeks with a strange old lady who can't even hear me?" Evan wondered glumly. He remembered eavesdropping on his parents 2 weeks earlier when they had made the plan. They were sitting opposite each other at the kitchen table. They thought Evan was out in the back garden, but he was in the hall, his back pressed against the wall, listening. His father, he learned, was reluctant to leave Evan with Catherine. "She's a very stubborn old woman," Mr. Ross had said. "Look at her, deaf for 20 years, and she's refused to learn sign language or to lip read. How's she going to look after Evan?" "She took good care of you when you were a boy," Mrs. Ross had argued. "That was 30 years ago," Mr. Ross protested. "Well, we have no choice," Evan heard his mother say. "There's no one else to leave him with. Everyone else is away on holiday. You know, August is just the wrong month for you to be transferred to Atlanta." "Well, excuse me," Mr. Ross said sarcastically. Okay, discussion closed. You're absolutely right, dear. We have no choice. Catherine it is. You'll drive Evan there, and then fly down to Atlanta. It'll be a good experience for him," Evan heard his mother say. "He needs to learn how to cope under difficult circumstances. You know, moving to Atlanta, leaving all his friends behind, that isn't going to be easy on Evan either." "Okay, I said okay," Mr. Ross said impatiently. "It's settled. Evan will be fine. Catherine is a bit weird, but she's perfectly harmless." Evan heard the kitchen chairs scraping across the lino, indicating that his parents were getting up, their discussion over. His fate was sealed. Silently, he had made his way out of the front door and round to the back garden to think about what he had just overheard. He leaned against the trunk of the big maple tree, which hid him from the house. It was his favourite place to think. Why didn't his parents ever include him in their discussions, he wondered. If they were going to discuss leaving him with some old aunt he'd never seen before, shouldn't he at least have a say in the matter? He learned all of the big family news by eavesdropping in from the hallway. It just wasn't fair. Evan pulled a small twig off the ground and tapped it against the broad tree trunk. Aunt Catherine was weird. That's what his dad had said. She was so weird his father didn't want to leave Evan with her. But they had no choice. No choice? Maybe they'll change their mind and take me to Atlanta with them, Evan thought. Maybe they'll realise that they can't do this to me. But now, 2 weeks later, he was standing in front of Aunt Catherine's grey house, feeling very nervous, staring at the brown suitcase filled with his belongings, which stood beside his mother on the step. "There's nothing to be afraid of," he assured himself. "It's only for 2 weeks, maybe less." But then the words popped out before he'd even had a chance to think about them. "Mum, what if Aunt Catherine is evil?" "Huh?" The question caught his mother by surprise. "Evil? Why would she be evil, Evan?" And as she said this, facing Evan with her back to the house, the front door was pulled open and Aunt Catherine, a large woman with startling black hair, filled the doorway. Staring past his mother, Evan saw the knife in Catherine's hand, and he saw that the blade of the knife was dripping with blood. And next up is Monster Blood 2. Evan Ross backed into the corner of the den as he stared at his dog Trigger. The tan cocker spaniel lowered his head and stared back at Evan with wet brown eyes. The old dog's tail began to wag excitedly. "Trigger," Evan cried angrily, "have you eaten Monster Blood again?" The dog's tail began wagging faster. Trigger let out a low bark that rumbled like thunder. Evan's back pressed against the dark, panelled den wall. Trigger took a few heavy steps towards him, panting hard. His huge pink tongue, as big as a salami, hung out of his enormous mouth. "Have you?" Evan demanded. "Have you eaten more monster blood?" The answer to Evan's question was obvious. Trigger had been normal cocker spaniel size that morning. Now the dog stared down at Evan, as big as a pony. Trigger's furry paws, the size of elephant feet, thudded on the den carpet. His enormous tail pounded louder than a bass drum against the side of a leather couch. Evan covered his ears as Trigger let out an excited high-pitched bark that shook the den walls. "Stay, stay!" Evan shouted. The enormous dog panted hard, his tail wagging furiously. "Oh no!" Evan thought in horror. "He wants to play." "Sit!" Evan screamed. "Sit!" But Trigger didn't know how to sit. For 10 years, 70 dog years, Evan had tried to teach Trigger to sit on command, but Trigger just didn't get it. "Where did you find the monster blood?" Evan demanded. "We all saw it disappear into thin air. Gone. It was just gone. You know, that stuff makes you grow and grow and grow. Where did you find it?" Trigger tilted his big head at an angle, as if trying to understand Evan's words. Then, wagging his huge tail excitedly, he started to run to Evan. "No!" Evan thought. "He's going to jump on me. He's going to jump. If he jumps, he'll crush me." An enormous glob of drool escaped Trigger's open mouth and hit the carpet with a loud smack. "Sit!" Evan cried, his voice choking with panic. "Sit, boy, sit!" Trigger hesitated, staring down at Evan. To Evan's horror, the dog was growing even bigger. Trigger was now as tall as a horse. Where did he find the container of monster blood? Evan wondered, his back pressed against the wall. Where? The dog's brown eyes gaped at Evan like shimmering dark pools. Trigger uttered another deafening bark that shook the whole house. "Yuck!" Evan cried, squeezing his nose with 2 fingers. The dog's breath rushed at him like a strong wind, and it smelled as sour as a dead mouse. "Get back, Trigger, get back!" Evan pleaded, but Trigger had never learned that command either. Without warning, the giant dog leaped at Evan. "Down! Down!" Evan shrieked. Trigger's mouth gaped open. The dog's huge tongue licked the side of Evan's face. The tongue felt scratchy and hot. Evan's carrot-colour hair was matted with sticky dog saliva. "No, please!" Evan screamed. "I'm only 12. I'm too young to die." He started to scream again, but Trigger's big teeth clamped around his waist, cutting off his breath. "Trigger, put me down! Put me down!" Evan choked out. The dog's wagging tail sent a lamp crashing to the floor. The teeth held Evan gently but firmly. He felt himself being lifted off of the floor. "Put me down! Put me down!" Why wouldn't the stupid dog listen? Evan thrashed his arms and legs frantically, trying to squirm free, but Trigger held on tightly. The dog's enormous paws pounded on the carpet. He carried Evan through the house and across the kitchen. Then he lowered his head and butted the kitchen screen door open. The door slammed hard behind them. Trigger began trotting over the grass. "Bad dog! Bad dog!" Evan cried. His voice came out in a tiny squeak. Had Trigger grown even bigger? Evan was at least a metre off of the ground now. "Put me down! Down!" he cried. Evan watched the green grass of the back garden bounce beneath him. Trigger was panting as he walked. The panting sounds made Evan's whole body vibrate. He realised his jeans and t-shirts were soaked from dog saliva. "Trigger doesn't mean to hurt me," Evan told himself. "He's just being playful. Thank goodness he's such a good dog. His teeth aren't very sharp." The dog stopped at the edge of the flower bed at the bottom of the garden. He lowered Evan nearly to the ground, but didn't let go. His paws began to churn up the soft dirt. "Let me down!" Evan shrieked. "Trigger, listen to me!" Breathing hard, his hot, sour breath pouring over Evan, the dog continued to dig. A wave of horror swept over Evan as he realised what Trigger was doing. "No!" Evan shrieked. "Don't bury me, Trigger!" The dog dug faster, its front paws churning furiously. Soft dirt flew past Evan's face. "I'm not a bone!" Evan cried frantically. "Trigger, I am not a bone! Don't bury me! Trigger, please, don't bury me!" Monster blood free. The monster blood, it's growing again. Evan Ross stared at the quivering green blob in his driveway. It looked like an enormous wad of sticky green bubblegum. It was bigger than a beach ball, bigger than 2 beach balls. The green blob trembled and shook as if it were breathing hard. It made disgusting sucking sounds. Then it started to bounce. Evan took a step back. How did the sticky goo get out of its can, he wondered. Who left it in the driveway, and who opened the can? Evan knew that once monster blood starts to grow, it can't be stopped. It will grow and suck up everything in its path. Evan knew this from painful experience. He had seen a giant glob of monster blood swallow Kid's whole. He'd seen what had happened when his dog, Trigger, had eaten monster blood. The Cocker Spaniel had grown and grown and grown until he was big enough to pick up Evan in his teeth and bury him in the backyard. A small chunk of monster blood had turned Cuddles, the tiny hamster, in Evan's class, into a raging, growling monster. The giant hamster, bigger than a gorilla, had roared through the school, destroying everything in its path. This gunk is dangerous, Evan thought. It may be the most dangerous green, slimy stuff on Earth. So how did it get in Evan's driveway? And what was he going to do about it? The monster blood bounced and hiccuped. It made more disgusting sucking sounds as it bounced. It picked up sticks and gravel in the driveway. They stuck to its side for a moment before being sucked into the centre of the giant, wet ball. Evan took another step back as the ball slowly started to roll. Oh no! A low moan escaped his throat. Please, no. The monster blood rolled over the driveway towards Evan, picking up speed as it moved. Evan had tossed one of his rollerblades by the side of the house. The green goo swallowed up the skate with a loud fuck. Evan gulped as he saw the skate disappear into the bouncing green ball. I'm next, he stammered out loud. No way, he told himself. I'm getting out of here. He turned to run and went sprawling over the other skate. Ow! He cried out as he fell hard on his elbows and knees. Pain shot up his arms. He had landed on both funny bones. Shaking away the tingling, he scrambled to his knees. He turned in time to see the seething goo roll over him. He opened his mouth to scream, but the scream was trapped inside of him as the heavy green gunk splattered over his face. He thrashed both arms wildly, kicked his feet, but the sticky goo wrapped around him, pulling him in. I can't breathe, he realised. And then everything turned green. Monster Blood 4. Evan Ross was thinking about Monster Blood. He thought about Monster Blood a lot. Evan wished he had never discovered Monster Blood. Sticky, slimy green goo had been the most dangerous substance on Earth. Evan knew that as soon as you opened a can of Monster Blood, you were doomed. The monster blood will grow and suck up everything in its path, and if you accidentally eat some of the green goo, look out. A tiny chunk of monster blood had turned Cuddles, the classroom hamster, into a growling monster as big as a gorilla, and when Evan accidentally swallowed a little bit of it, he shot up taller than his house. It had not been the happiest day of Evan's life. It was a day he kept trying to forget. So why was he thinking about monster blood today? His green sweater reminded him of monster blood. He had begged his mum not to make the sweater green, but she had already started knitting it. Too late to change colours. You look good in green, she told him. It brings out your eyes. I don't want to bring out my eyes, Evan told her. He wanted to scream. The yarn she had used was greener than the Jolly Green Giant. He pictured himself trapped inside a giant green blob of monster blood. Wear it to your cousin Kermit's, Mrs. Ross instructed him. I don't need a sweater, he protested. Just put it in my suitcase. Wear it. It's winter, she insisted. It gets cold, even here in Atlanta. I don't want to stay at Kermit's, Evan grumbled, pulling the sweater over his head. Yuck. Green and itchy. How long are you and Dad going to be out west? Only 9 or 10 days, his mother replied. Only? Evan cried, struggling into the tight wool sleeves. I'll die. Aunt Dee's food is so horrible. She puts that hot sauce on everything, even brownies. Your aunt does not put hot sauce on brownies, Mrs. Ross replied sternly. She likes to make spicy food, but... I'll explode, Evan insisted. And that freaky little creep Kermit. Don't call your cousin a freaky little creep, Mrs. Ross scolded. Well, he is one, isn't he? Evan demanded. That's beside the point, his mum said. She pulled the green sweater down over Evan's waist and admired it. It fits perfectly. And I like that shade of green. I look like a ripe watermelon, Evan grumbled. Don't forget, Aunt Dee is paying for you to babysit Kermit, his mum reminded him. She handed him his suitcase. You want to go to camp this summer, right? Well, you can't go unless you earn the money to pay for it. I know. He kissed his mum goodbye. Your dad and I will call you when we get to Tuscan, Mrs. Ross said. Take good care of Kermit, and don't give Aunt Dee a hard time. I won't eat until you get back, Evan told her. I'll probably weigh 10 pounds. His mum laughed. She thinks I'm joking, Evan thought bitterly. He hoisted up his rucksack and his suitcase and headed for the back door. He passed a mirror in the hall and caught a glimpse of himself in the sweater. Sick, he muttered. I look like a pickle. Evan, what did you say? His mum called. I said, thanks for the cool sweater, he called back to her. A few seconds later, he was walking through back gardens, making his way to Kermit's house at the end of the block. Maybe I can hide this sweater somewhere, he thought. Maybe I can give it to Kermit as a Christmas present. No, Kermit is such a shrimp, the sweater would be down to his knees. It was a sunny, crisp winter day. The sweater glowed under the bright sunlight. It really did remind Evan of Monster Blood. He pictured the slimy green gunk. He pictured heaps and heaps of it oozing over the gardens as he passed, bubbling and pulsing. As he walked along, Evan had no idea that he was about to have another Monster Blood adventure. He had no idea that he was about to discover a whole new kind of Monster Blood. He had no idea that the green Monster Blood was silly kids' stuff compared to the Monster Blood he was about to find. Monster Blood for breakfast. My name is Matt Daniels, and my terrifying story began on a typical morning. In my house, typical means totally annoying, because who showed up just as my sister, Livy, and I were finishing our breakfast? The kid from next door, Bradley Wormser. Everyone at school calls him Worm, and it's a pretty good nickname for him, trust me. Bradley shows up in our kitchen almost every morning, just as Livy and I are finishing breakfast, and he gobbles up whatever he can grab. So skinny, it's hard to believe he could eat everything on the kitchen table if we let him. He really does look like a long, lanky worm with glasses. I have this idea that one day I'm going to glue the Pop-Tarts to the table. Then I'm going to enjoy the look on Bradley's face as he struggles to pull them up. I'm great at inventing stuff, and I'm really interested in science. And I'm a pretty good athlete too. But none of that helps me against Wormser. He drives me nuts. This morning, Bradley waited till my mum's back was turned, then he dropped a fat, dead horsefly into my cereal. I stared down at the fly floating on top of the milk. Yucko, Bradley said. You don't want that, do you, Matt? There's a dead fly in it. He pulled the bowl away from me, tilted it to his face, and drank the cereal down. Then he spat the fly on the floor. Not bad, he said, using Livy's sleeve to wipe his mouth. A little soggy. Let go of me, Livy cried. He snapped his fingers a centimetre away from her nose. He thinks that's totally funny. Livy hates it. Mum has no idea what a pain Bradley is. She was cleaning something at the sink. Mum, can I have another bowl of cereal? I asked. No seconds, Matt, she replied without turning around. You've got to watch your weight. Your big swim meet is coming up soon, remember? My stomach growled. Angrily, I grabbed a wet glob of cornflakes from Livy's bowl with my fingers and stuck it on Bradley's nose. Mum turned around. Matt, she shouted, glaring at me. Don't play with your food. Yeah, Matt, don't play with your food, Bradley said, grinning. As soon as Mum went back to cleaning, he made a grab for Livy's Pop-Tart. Mum turned around again just as Livy snatched it away. Livy, no fighting, she snapped. But Mum... See what I told you? You spelled Bradley's name P-A-I-N. This was the most important week of my life, and I didn't need Bradley in my face. I would love to invent something to make the creep disappear, or maybe I could just ask him to disappear. But there are a few problems. Then, he lives in the house right next door, and his mum and my mum are business partners. They both run a party catering business from our homes. This means that Livy, Bradley and I are thrown together a lot. And there's one other big problem. Bradley worships me. This morning, Bradley put his paws all over my new swim team t-shirt. Matt, can I have this shirt? Where'd you get it? It's awesome. It's kind of small on you, isn't it? He always wants to dress like me. He thinks it will make him popular too. It's pitiful, right? And the guy never stops talking. Did you see that scary movie on HBO last night? Claw? It totally creeped me out. when those two claws reached out of the basement and grabbed the kid by the shoulders. He squeezed Livy's shoulders with both hands, just like this. Haha, I'm the vicious claw. Stop, let go, my sister screamed. Livy, Mum scolded. Stop being such a crab, Bradley laughed. He waited until my mum left the kitchen. Then he pulled a small orange and black can from his backpack. Matt, check this out. Go ahead, open the lid, I dare you. I groaned. What now? Worm spends all of his time online. He plays these sci-fi battle games till late at night, and he's always sending away for all kinds of weird things. He shoved the can towards me. Go ahead, open it, he said. I pushed his hand back. No way. He grinned. Okay, I'll do it. He gripped the lid and started to turn it. Then, suddenly, he stopped, and his eyes went wide. His smile faded. Watch out, he screamed. It's gonna blow. And so concludes our short journey into the world of Monster Blood. Which of these books did you like best? If you've enjoyed this video, feel free to leave a like, comment or subscribe.